Our story begins in a small, bustling town, where the sun always seemed a little brighter and the laughter a little louder. Sarah and Mark were young then, barely out of their school uniforms, but already bound by a love that felt ancient and unbreakable. They were soulmates, two halves of one hopeful dream. Mark was brilliant. His mind was like a sharp knife, able to cut through the most difficult problems. But he came from a poor family. His dreams of university, of becoming a powerful lawyer who would fight for the common man, were huge, but the path to them was blocked by a lack of money. Sarah, though, saw beyond the empty pockets. She saw the fire in his eyes. She saw his future. "Mark," she would say, her hand gently tracing the lines of worry on his brow, "your mind is a gift. We will find a way. We will build this dream together." And so, their life became a humble, shared adventure. Their home was a single room behind the tailor's shop, smelling faintly of old cloth and new dreams. They had nothing but their love and a shared vision of the successful life they would one day lead. Sarah's devotion was not just words, it was action. It was a fierce, protective shield around Mark's ambition. While Mark spent his days immersed in dusty law books at the local library, Sarah became a whirlwind of activity. She worked 3 different jobs. First, early in the morning, she sold freshly baked bread in the marketplace, her voice clear and cheerful, calling out to the sleepy townspeople. Then, she would rush to the clinic, where she worked as a cleaner, scrubbing floors until her back ached. Finally, in the evenings, she would sit by the roadside, braiding intricate hairstyles for the neighborhood women, earning the last few coins of the day. Every single coin that wasn't used for their most basic needs, a small bowl of rice and beans, went into a cracked clay pot. This pot was their bank, their treasure chest, the only thing that stood between Mark and his dream. When Mark finally got the acceptance letter to the prestigious city university, they celebrated not with a feast, but with a quiet, tearful embrace. "This is your victory, Sarah," Mark whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "No, Mark," she corrected him, "this is ours." Life in the city was harder. Sarah moved with him, finding new jobs to support his studies. She would stay up late, making sure their tiny room was quiet, so he could study. She was his personal alarm clock, his cook, his cheerleader, and his proofreader for every long, complicated essay. She learned to understand words like jurisprudence and precedent just by listening to him practice. One particularly cold night, Mark was studying for his final, most difficult exam. He was discouraged and tired. He spoke of giving up. Sarah took his hand. She didn't scold him. She just held his study lamp a little closer to the page. "Remember why we started, my love?" she said softly. "Remember the little room, the clay pot, and the man who wants to fight for the common people. You are too close to stop now. You will pass this exam. We will pass this exam." He looked at her then, seeing the exhaustion on her face, the faint oil stain on her simple dress, and the fierce, unyielding love in her eyes. He straightened up, picked up his pen, and studied until dawn. Mark passed his exams with flying colors. He graduated at the top of his class. The town celebrated, but no one celebrated as quietly and profoundly as Sarah. His first job was with a mid-sized law firm. They moved into a slightly better, bigger apartment. For the first time, Sarah didn't have to work 3 jobs. She got one job as an assistant in a small administrative office. They would stand on their little balcony at night, looking at the city lights. Mark would wrap his arm around her. "We did it, Sarah. We finally did it." The little victories came quickly. Mark won his first big case, a case for a poor farmer against a powerful company. The newspaper called him a rising star. They bought a small, second-hand car. They started saving for their wedding, which they had promised themselves would be beautiful, a true reflection of their long journey. Their future was not just bright, it was boundless and completely intertwined. They were Sarah and Mark, the team that started with nothing and built an empire of dreams with sacrifice, sweat, and unshakable loyalty. They believed that nothing could ever break their bond. But life, my friends, is a river. And Mark's boat was sailing toward a shore Sarah had never known. The humble river of their shared dreams was about to meet the vast, glittering ocean of power. Mark's talent could not be contained. His reputation as a fierce, ethical lawyer grew exponentially. He started winning cases that others considered impossible. Soon, he was no longer working for the mid-sized firm. He was headhunted by the most prestigious, exclusive law practice in the entire nation, the one that handled the affairs of the nation's elite, the powerful politicians, and even the royal family. His office moved from a simple, sunlit room to a high-rise tower of polished glass and marble. His suits were no longer store-bought, they were tailored silk. His new colleagues were people with important names and important families. Mark's success was exactly what Sarah had worked for. She should have been ecstatic. And yet, a tiny, cold pebble of unease began to form in her stomach. The changes were so subtle at first, they were almost invisible. Like the quiet turning of the tide. He started working longer hours. Not the old, passionate long hours spent reviewing files, but social long hours. Dinners with clients, golf trips, cocktail parties at grand, walled estates. Mark would come home late, his clothes smelling of expensive cologne and foreign perfume, his eyes holding a look Sarah couldn't quite decipher, a mixture of excitement and distance. He started correcting Sarah's speech in public. "Sarah, dear, it's financier, not financial man," he would say with a soft, condescending laugh, immediately followed by, "I'm only trying to help you fit in with my new circle, darling." Their apartment, which had once felt like a palace of love, now felt too small, too simple. Mark began to suggest they shouldn't host their old friends anymore. "They just don't understand the level I'm operating at now," he told her one night, dismissing their longtime friends with a wave of his hand. Sarah started to lose her confidence. She, the girl who managed 3 jobs and built a lawyer, now felt like a simple mistake, a woman from Mark's past that didn't fit into his shiny new future. She tried to keep up. She bought new, expensive clothes. She learned to hold a wine glass just so. But in the eyes of Mark's new friends, and slowly in Mark's own eyes, she could see the silent judgment. She was not one of them. The love did not vanish overnight. It frayed slowly, like a strong rope pulled apart one strand at a time. Their conversations became transactional. Less about shared dreams, more about his schedule and her arrangements. The tender, late-night talks about their hopes for the future were replaced by Mark falling asleep immediately, exhausted from his high-level networking. One evening, they were at a lavish party hosted by one of the king's ministers. Sarah felt completely out of place in her borrowed silk dress. Mark was across the room, laughing with a group of impeccably dressed, dazzling people. Sarah watched him. He looked magnificent. He was the success. But when his eyes swept over the room, they did not linger on her. They looked through her. It was a glance of complete indifference. At that party, Sarah noticed someone new. A woman of breathtaking beauty, draped in jewels, with a grace that spoke of generations of wealth. This was Princess Amara, the youngest daughter of the king. She was a client of Mark's firm, and she was watching Mark too, but with an open, undeniable interest. Mark spent the rest of the night by the princess's side, discussing complex international law, the topic Sarah had once helped him study for his exams. Mark didn't introduce Sarah. He didn't even acknowledge her presence. When they drove home in their new, silent car, Sarah finally broke the heavy silence. "Mark, who was that woman? The one you spoke to all night?" Mark gave a small, weary sigh, as if Sarah was asking him to solve a basic math problem. "That, Sarah, was Princess Amara. She is a very important client. You wouldn't understand the details. Go to sleep." He had walled her out of his world with one simple, crushing sentence: "You wouldn't understand." The unspoken tension, the quiet realization that their shared reality was dissolving, settled over Sarah like a suffocating blanket. She lay awake that night, not crying but staring at the ceiling, understanding that the powerful ladder Mark had climbed was now separating them. And she was on the ground, holding the broken pieces of the foundation. The truth, when it finally arrived, did not come on silent wings. It came with the deafening sound of a public announcement, shattering the last fragments of Sarah's hope. It was a Tuesday morning. Sarah was at her office, making photocopies, thinking about calling Mark to discuss their delayed wedding plans. Suddenly, Everyone in the office gasped. They were all crowded around the small television in the corner, tuned to the national news. The anchor's voice boomed, "Breaking news, a royal wedding announcement. Princess Amara engaged to legal star, Mark Asante." On the screen was a large, smiling photo of Mark, looking proud and handsome in his tailored suit, standing next to the exquisitely beautiful Princess Amara. They looked perfect, like a picture from a storybook. A storybook that did not include Sarah. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The room spun. The photocopy machine seemed to roar. She didn't faint. She simply stood there, an emptiness opening up inside her chest. The sheer public cruelty of the announcement. Mark had not told her first. He had let the entire world announce his betrayal. Her colleagues, kind people, rushed to her, their faces filled with pity and shock. "Sarah, dear God, is this true? We know you and Mark." Sarah could not speak. She simply nodded, picked up her handbag, and walked out of the office, out of the building, and into the indifferent city streets. She went straight to their apartment. Mark was already there, packing a suitcase. He looked different, a little sheepish, but mostly relieved, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The air between them was cold and sharp. Sarah didn't shout. Her grief was too deep for noise. "Mark," her voice was a flat, empty whisper. "Why? After everything? After the clay pot, the bread, the scrubbing floors?" Mark stopped packing. He looked at her, but his eyes were distant, focused on a future Sarah couldn't touch. "Sarah, please, don't be dramatic. I was going to tell you eventually." "Eventually? After the world knew? After your face was on every newspaper? What about our wedding? The one we have been saving for since we were teenagers?" He sighed, the sigh of an important man dealing with an inconvenience. "Look, Sarah, I owe you everything. I know that. And I will pay you back. Every single penny. I will set you up financially. You'll never have to worry about money again." The offer of money, payment for a decade of her life, was the final, ultimate insult. "This is not about money, Mark. This is about our life. A promise. I gave you my youth, my strength, everything I had." Mark finally turned to face her, his expression hardening. His voice was detached, professional, the voice of the lawyer. "I appreciate your sacrifices, Sarah. Truly. But I have an opportunity now that no man of my standing could refuse. This is about destiny. It's about influence and power. Princess Amara's family can open doors that you, Sarah, with all your kindness, simply cannot. She is royalty. She is my future. I need a wife who can stand beside me in the highest court, not a—" He paused, searching for a polite word, and then settled on one that cut her to the bone. "Not a reminder of my past struggles. I have to secure my future. I have to choose status over a sentiment, no matter how sweet." He offered his hand, holding a checkbook. Sarah just looked at his hand, then at his face, the face she had loved since childhood, now cold and unfamiliar. She did not take the checkbook. She simply walked past him, opened the door, and walked out, leaving Mark, the checkbook, the nice apartment, and the broken pieces of their shared dream behind her. Sarah found refuge in the small, one-room house of her old neighbor, Mama Rose, who welcomed her with a fierce, protective embrace. The days that followed were a blur of profound heartbreak. The clay pot that held their wedding savings was shattered, the coins scattered across the floor, a fitting symbol of her life. Sarah didn't cry for Mark, she cried for the girl she used to be, the hopeful girl whose loyalty had been rewarded with the sharp edge of ambition. She had lost everything: her love, her future, her financial security, and her faith in a world where good deeds are rewarded. The pain was physical, a heavy stone in her chest. But even in the deepest darkness, a tiny spark of the old Sarah remained, the girl who sold bread at dawn and studied by lamplight. She realized one night, staring at the full African moon, that Mark had not only betrayed her, he had underestimated her. He saw her as a simple foundation to be left behind, not a powerful, self-sustaining building. Mark had taken her hope, but he had not taken her mind, her strength, or her story. Sarah knew then that she could either wither from the betrayal or use the fire of its pain to forge something new and indestructible. The slow, arduous journey of reclaiming her own life was about to begin. Betrayal can be a poison, but it can also be a fierce, refining fire. For Sarah, the pain of abandonment became the unexpected fuel for her transformation. The first step was the hardest, accepting the silence. Sarah knew she had to cut all ties to Mark's world. She deleted his number. She stopped reading the newspapers that glorified his royal courtship. She moved back to her old town, the place where she and Mark had started. This was not retreat. It was an act of deliberate remembrance. She needed to remember the person she was before Mark defined her. She found a job in a small, independent publisher's office. It was a humble salary, but the work was about words, ideas, and stories, the kind of things Mark had once valued. Sarah worked tirelessly, focusing all her emotional energy into her professional life. She was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. She learned about typesetting, editing, and marketing. Slowly, she began to find her voice again, not the hesitant voice of a supportive girlfriend, but the strong, decisive voice of a woman who knows her own worth. One day, her boss asked her to look over a manuscript, a simple booklet on financial literacy for women in rural areas. Sarah read it and felt a connection. She knew the struggles of poor women trying to build a future. She didn't just proofread it, she completely rewrote sections, making the language simpler, the examples clearer, drawing on her own experience of juggling money from the bread sales, the cleaning job, and the braiding. Her revisions transformed the dull booklet into a passionate, practical guide. Her boss was stunned by the quality of her work and her deep understanding of the common person's struggle. He recognized a true, raw talent. "Sarah," he said, holding the revised manuscript, "this is excellent. This is not just editing. This is teaching. You need to be doing more than working in an office." He encouraged her to develop her own series of pamphlets and workshops. Sarah hesitated. She was afraid of the spotlight. But then, she remembered Mark's words, "You wouldn't understand the details." Now she would understand. She would become the teacher of the details. Her first public workshop was small, just 10 women in a church hall. She spoke not of fancy financial terms, but of practical sacrifice, smart saving, and the power of small, consistent effort, the wisdom she had learned from the clay pot. Her story of rising from poverty, fueled by her own labor, resonated powerfully. Without naming Mark, she told the tale of being a supporter who became a forgotten one, and how she found her freedom not in a rich man's arms, but in her own hands. Word of her workshops spread like wildfire. Soon, women were traveling from surrounding towns to hear her speak. The small publishers started printing hundreds, then thousands of her booklets. Sarah began to get invitations to speak on radio shows, then local television. Her message was simple but profound. Your greatest investment is not in another person's dream, but in your own potential. As Sarah's star rose, so did the public memory of Mark's betrayal. People connected the dots. The rising star lawyer who was now engaged to the princess, and the inspiring financial guide, who had sacrificed everything for his success. The African community, which values loyalty and honor above all else, was fiercely protective of Sarah. The public narrative began to turn against Mark. Newspapers, which had once praised his ascent, now subtly questioned his character. Headlines went from "Royal Love Match" to "The Price of Ambition." Did Mark Asante abandon his true love? The reaction was a silent, powerful reckoning. People began to boycott products endorsed by Mark's firm. Old friends of Mark's started publicly posting their support for Sarah. Sarah never spoke a single negative word about Mark. She never needed to. Her success, her calm grace, and her inspiring message were more damning than any accusation. She was the living, breathing proof of what Mark had lost. Mark was marrying a title, Sarah was earning one, the people's heroine. Her comeback was not just a personal triumph, it was a societal statement on the true value of loyalty, hard work, and the incredible, often unseen strength of the woman behind the successful man. Sarah had successfully reclaimed her narrative. Life, dear friends, has a curious way of balancing the scales. Mark chose status, believing it was the highest reward. Sarah chose self-respect, a reward that proved to be far more valuable. Mark's wedding to Princess Amara was indeed a spectacle, a dazzling event broadcast to the nation. He had his wish. He was now a part of the highest echelon of society. But his new life was not the boundless freedom he had imagined. It was a gilded cage. He was no longer the rising star lawyer, he was simply the princess's husband. His fame was borrowed, his power contingent upon his royal in-laws. He was expected to follow endless protocols. His every movement was scrutinized by the palace, his personal opinions filtered and controlled. The royal family's politics were complicated, and Mark, the brilliant lawyer, found himself caught in endless, petty conflicts that had nothing to do with justice or law. His relationship with Princess Amara was cold. Their marriage was a strategic alliance, not a union of love. She was kind but distant, and fully devoted to her royal duties. The passion, the simple, honest companionship he had shared with Sarah, even with all their struggles, was missing. He was successful, but deeply, truly unhappy. The public scrutiny became unbearable. Every stumble, every tired expression, every rumor was reported. The constant comparison to Sarah, the loyal, hardworking woman he had thrown away, haunted him in the press. He once looked across a ballroom at a state function and saw a famous, successful woman being celebrated. It took him a moment to realize it was Sarah. She was speaking on a panel about African women in leadership. She looked stunning, vibrant, and utterly free. She caught his eye, gave a polite, distant nod, and turned back to her engaged audience. Mark felt a crushing wave of regret, the terrible weight of his choice. Sarah, meanwhile, soared. She started her own nonprofit organization focused on female entrepreneurship. She got a major government contract to roll out her financial literacy program nationally. Her triumph was not material, though she had all the material comforts she needed now. Her triumph was the realization that she had built a life based on integrity and purpose, not on another person's reflected glory. Her greatest form of retribution was not revenge, but her own unassailable success. She became a mentor to thousands of young women, telling them, "Do not be the foundation that is left behind. Be the building itself. Be complete in your own right." Sarah eventually met a man. A kind, quiet man who was a professor of economics. He saw her not as a reflection of his status, but as a brilliant, whole person. He was proud of her success and found joy in their simple, honest moments. They married in a small, beautiful ceremony, surrounded by the people who genuinely loved and respected Sarah for who she was. Years passed. Mark remained in the palace, growing older, more withdrawn, constantly looking over his shoulder, trapped by the grandeur he had chased. He had achieved the pinnacle of power, but lost the essence of happiness. One day, Mark was reviewing some old files from his early law firm days. Tucked inside a folder was a small, dusty, faded photograph. It was a picture of him and Sarah, young and beaming, standing in front of their tiny room, holding the cracked clay pot, the symbol of their shared, humble dream. He looked at the picture, then out the window at the vast, cold grounds of the royal palace. He finally understood. He had traded a love that was rich in loyalty and humanity for a life that was merely wealthy in title and prestige. He had chosen the temporary glitter of gold over the eternal value of the heart. And so, dear friends, this is where we leave the tale of Sarah and Mark, a poignant reflection on true value. Sarah, the simple girl from the marketplace, proved that real power is not given by a crown, but earned through character. Loyalty is not a price to be paid, but a treasure to be guarded. And happiness lies not in the height of the climb, but in the truth of the path you choose to take. May we all remember Sarah's strength, and build our own futures on foundations that cannot be shaken by the winds of ambition or the lure of false status. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with friends, and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest updates. Thanks for watching and stay blessed.